Yutaro, welcome, man. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, it's a little rainy out here in Tokyo, but yeah, doing fine. Thank you.
I'm in Mexico and it's ridiculously hot right now.
It's
Like
hot.
I would beg for rain right now. Definitely would.
Yeah,
Hey,
yeah.
I love the hat, by the way. Pretty cool.
Oh yeah,
If you want to show it to people. And yeah, Jutaro, for those that do not know him, comes from a very cool project called Orca from the Solana ecosystem. So yeah, would you like to tell people what Orca is and what your role is in there?
yep, definitely. So Orca is a DEX on in the Solana ecosystem, and so I suppose at this point we're one of the OG projects. We launched in February of 2021, and yeah, we've been just chugging along this entire time. We're actually kind of, in terms of volume, the highest volume DEX in Solana for a while. And more recently, we launched Whirlpools, which is a concentrated liquidity AMM, similar to kind of Uniswap v3 in the Ethereum ecosystem. And yeah, we have an emphasis on being easy to use. Also, we've been investing in making the SDK developer friendly, so that other projects can integrate with us. And yeah, all that
You
jazz.
know, I understood from your materials that you do have like a lot of focus on being easy to use. That's like your main thing, right? And actually, that doesn't seem to be like just like a marketing catchphrase. Like I actually sourced opinions from users, and they do say it's the easiest dex to use everywhere. Yeah. So how do you get there? Like, how did you achieve this?
Sure. So I think it's really interesting. I feel like being easy to use is something that almost came out organically, kind of that the community started saying about us more organically. I would say our emphasis has always been on being human friendly. And
Uh huh.
so, particularly my co-founder Ori is so she's a programmer, but she also has a design background, and she started in crypto when we started Orca, and when she started looking at the other dexes in the crypto ecosystem, she just found that there were a lot of things that were lacking that were relatively easy to implement, but for one reason or another, it was just never really implemented, that could improve the user experience. So, some of the things that she did originally was, for example, having a side panel with the user's token balances, so that they can actually see how many tokens they have before trading. Another
Oh, that's
one
cool.
was, yeah, it's very straightforward, right? Especially from an implementation perspective. Um, Another one was whenever a user wanted to trade tokens, um, showing the user the price according to CoinGecko, so that they can do a price comparison to make sure that they're getting a reasonable trade. Also,
Okay.
another thing that's like relatively easy to implement, but something that no one had really done before. And uh, I think our philosophy has always been just start with what is the ideal user experience, and then create a product that strives towards that ideal user experience as much as possible. Um, we're probably starting to see kind of an increase in an emphasis in user experience, but especially in 2000, even up to like 2020, um, crypto was a lot more niche, I suppose, and there were less users, and so a lot of times it was just programmers, building interfaces that were like almost designed for other programmers, and we just have a different approach there.
I think I mean I live with a UX designer. My partner is a UX designer, and I found it very interesting that I always thought like Uniswap was like dead on, super easy to use, whatever. And then I showed it to her, and she's like, "Oh, this sucks. This is super daunting." Because, of
Yeah.
course, it looked easy to me because I was already used to sending transactions in crypto and using MetaMask and approving things and all that. But yeah, from the perspective of the user, even like when you think about the writing in Uniswap, it's just not that friendly. Like, there are a lot of
Mhm.
buttons, even, well, there's not a lot of buttons overall, but like the buttons that you find, like, you're not too sure about what's gonna happen when you click those. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that there are things that are like, I guess, like, we in crypto are like too tunnel visioned about how to make them user friendly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm definitely guilty of that as well. My background is essentially as like a protocol developer for Ethereum, and then kind of like building DeFi protocols on Ethereum as well. But really just as an engineer, and yeah, it was only kind of once Ori started looking at the problem, kind of similar to, yeah, essentially your friend who's a UX designer, and uh, yeah, very similar experience. Ori was just like, this is all pretty terrible. Why is it done this way? Yeah. So yeah.
I also like, I, I'm not too familiar. I usually like to test like the products of the people I'm going to interview, but with Solana I had no way because I just don't hold Solana, and like,
Mhm.
I had to create a wallet and do like the whole thing. So that's my disclaimer here. I didn't test Orca before this, but
Okay.
the reviews from users are pretty good, and I find like the focus on usability should be more predominant in crypto. I think one question that I find myself asking these days to people that are in like more obscure ecosystems than like the mainstream Bitcoin Ethereum
Mhm.
is like, how are you feeling like all of these market turns over at like the Solana ecosystem?
Yeah. Um, so for me, I'm always kind of forward looking,
Mhm.
as in, you know, I think part of my role at Orca is, identifying kind of what are future opportunities, where will crypto go in the future, and then essentially, trying to get Orca in a place where we can go where the puck is going, not where the puck is right now. When it comes to like where's the puck right now, clearly crypto itself is like not in a great place. We're recording this on May 27th. Um, you know, I think like uh, a lot of altcoins got crushed essentially yesterday. ETH is doing worse than BTC and all that. But I'm really just thinking about like, where's the puck going in the future? And in that sense, like I actually feel very, very, very confident, and actually like fairly good about how things are going. So with Solana, we've clearly had these like network congestion issues, a lot of like scaling issues, but there's a number of protocol improvements that are being lined up over the next few months, that are directly addressing these issues. And the one thing that kind of like I had always known, and the reason why we built on Solana initially almost like 2 years ago, was that the kind of like foundational building blocks of the blockchain itself were very strong, and that the team itself is very strong, and that kind of over a long enough time horizon, Solana will be able to kind of like achieve, most likely, I would say, like most likely be able to achieve, kind of the vision of like having a scalable and decentralized blockchain.
I think the point of view you're sharing here is very. Sorry, are you hearing a lot of noise from my side?
There was like a few kind of like there's like some honking for a bit, but
Yeah,
um,
like there are these cars that just these little carts that go right through my street, and they're not just honking. Like, I think they're
yeah,
selling bread, and some people like them for dinner. I don't know.
yeah,
Anyways, the I think you hit the nail right in the head there with like Solana eventually being as decentralized as they expect to, because I think a lot of problems from that came with Solana experiencing some issues due to high congestion and all everything that happened, it really happened because people didn't get the message clearly enough that like Solana wasn't supposed to be like super decentralized at this stage. um, and this of course is not like the super popular opinion that everyone wants to hear, but I think it would just have set like the expectations a lot clearer. Do you find that like these issues with Solana have hurt I mean the ecosystem of Solana in general, or how do you feel about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think again, it might help to kind of look at things over a long enough time horizon. You know,
Hmm.
so I think in the short term, potentially does this potentially kind of dissuade maybe certain like developers from joining Solana potentially, and if that is the case, like that's definitely not great for Solana, but I would say like over a long enough time horizon, like Solana will be fine. And like kind of one data point to look at is even just like look at Ethereum in the last cycle. Ethereum went from cents to $1,200, and then it eventually went down all the way down to $80. The narrative was just really bad for Ethereum during that time. Um, a lot of people kind of like reverted back to saying Bitcoin, Bitcoin, Bitcoin. But if we look back at where we're at now, Ethereum has clearly kind of established itself as a blue chip, right? Like even you yourself said like the mainstream chips, the mainstream kind of cryptocurrencies are Bitcoin and Ethereum, but that was definitely not the case in in like 2017 or 2018. And
Yeah.
so I think like I guess I'm not saying that Solana is guaranteed to kind of like it's Solana is not guaranteed to like be a mainstream kind of project alongside Bitcoin and Ethereum, but we do have this like history of kind of things being overhyped, uh, things being sold off, not just in terms of price, but in terms of like overall sentiment. But then still kind of like establishing itself when you kind of get to the next part of the cycle.
I think also of course like so Solana hit it off like very, it hit a home run early on because like just being a high throughput chain, it was just very easy to compete with Ethereum at that point. And
Mhm.
I don't know, like are you in team killing Ethereum or in team let's find a way to coexist with Ethereum?
I mean, like, so first, I guess, like for me, I basically started my crypto career in Ethereum. Not just like not just like uh, I mean, in a very real way, right? Like I was developing, or I was helping develop Ethereum 2.0 with like the Go implementation team, um, and was also like involved with the Ethereum Foundation and whatnot. Um, I kind of just see like you know I don't know. I mean, like, will Ethereum kill Bitcoin? No. Will Solana kill Ethereum? No. Like, is there a ton of growth opportunity everywhere in cryptocurrencies? Like, yes. And I suppose like for me, uh, like we've decided to build a DEX on Solana. I think it's like a huge opportunity, and that's what we're going to be doing for a while.
And yeah, like moving more like into the details of the decks, you
Yeah.
mentioned whirlpools, which I think whirlpools must have been getting easier to explain as people get more used to Uniswap v3, because it's
Mhm.
just like the model that like the number one decks everywhere is following. But I mean, I'm interested in how you both separately arrived at sort of like the same conclusion that this was the most efficient way to do things. How did the whirlpools come to life?
Yeah, so I think there are a few ways of looking at it, a few ways of kind of like analyzing it in order to come to the conclusion that, essentially Whirlpools is the right product to build, and that it will be the like kind of dominant way in which trades will occur on Solana. But I think one way of looking at it is kind of the core functionality of AMMs is like incredibly incredibly uh, computationally efficient. It's an incredibly computationally efficient way to transact on the blockchain, and I think kind of like the the thing that um, the thing that like we've internalized at least is that although Solana is a high throughput blockchain, at least in comparison to Ethereum, it is still a blockchain, right? And it still is this like global network of validators that are like validating transactions in like a global state. And in that sense, it is still very unlike anything that is built in Web 2. It's still there are still like very real kind of constraints in terms of block space and computation. And so because of that, like AMMs are still kind of like the ideal way to trade um, on 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 a high throughput blockchain like Solana. And we've actually seen that play out now, where if you look at like the transaction volumes and on Solana, you see that like AMMs have essentially dominated. Already, and it's only been a year. And I think like over time, as there's kind of like more complexity in terms of transactions going through Solana, the gap will kind of increase even more because compute will become more expensive, block space will become more expensive, and then as that happens, like AMMs will become even more kind of like useful in comparison to other models. Um, and then the second thing is that specifically, the Whirlpools model, which is, we can call like concentrated liquidity AMMs, it's incredibly capital efficient. So yeah, I was saying earlier that AMMs are computationally efficient for like the blockchain environment. Concentrated liquidity AMMs are incredibly capital efficient, um, and I think it's basically kind of like the ideal, or it's we've done a lot of thinking and we've done a lot of like ideating on other ways to make it capital efficient, but I think like the general model is like the ideal way to make it capital efficient while still having kind of like the computational efficiency that AMMs have. um, and yeah, I think that's basically why, for example, Uniswap v3 is doing so well. And I think it's going to actually continue like being more and more useful. Um, because I think what we've seen is that the capital efficient, like there are constraints on capital when it comes to providing liquidity with like standard AMMs, where for like Sol USDC, for example, you have to provide like $200 million worth of liquidity to like provide the right amount of slippage that's optimal for like the trading demand. But $200 million of liquidity is just it's a lot of capital to put. But with kind of concentrated liquidity AMMs, you can basically do the same thing with like a fraction of the capital. You can do it with like, say, I'm just throwing out a number, but like $30 million instead of $200 million. And then the remaining money can be used elsewhere more productively, and that's just better for everyone.
Yeah, this is just a fascinating concept for me because I always thought like, yeah, like you providing liquidity to a specific price range wouldn't really be that much more efficient because then yeah, but because if trades are happening in that range, like the capital is still being used, do you have any like easy devices to think about this, of just why this becomes more efficient?
Sure. So okay, so one analogy that I use is so you can imagine like um, a ruler, right? Like a meter
Hmm.
long ruler. Um, so when you look at a meter long ruler, it has like little divots for 1 centimeter, 5 centimeter, 10 centimeters, etc. Right?
Right.
And you can think of the divots as like prices like possible prices at which a token can trade at.
Hmm.
And on one end, it's like zero, and on the other end, it's like essentially infinity. And so with like a normal AMM, you have to like basically provide liquidity across the entire range equally. So I feel like my analogy is going to start breaking apart pretty soon. I'm kind of just like thinking of it on the fly, so excuse me. But if you think of it as like maybe you have to like pour water into kind of this like little this big bucket. You know,
Uh-huh.
you basically have to like pour water across the entire space with like the old AMMs. So that's like clearly a lot of water. But like if if trades are only happening at one point, you're only really using the water in like a very narrow range.
Right.
Whereas with concentrated liquidity AMMs, it's the same general concept, except that instead of being forced to pour water across the entire width, you can choose where to pour water. And so, like, if there's only trading happening within like one certain subsection, you only have to pour water in like that one little subsection. And so, like, overall, there's less water being used. I don't know if that was like a good analogy at all, or I don't even know if that really answered a question, but that's just, yeah, kind of the way I
Uh,
think about it.
I think I was kind of missing the bit about the impermanent loss, just to help drive across the point, because that's effectively where you would become more efficient, right? Like not meeting impermanent loss through this process. But then you have
Yeah.
to, yeah, be adding two different types of water, and yeah, maybe it gets a
Yeah.
bit complicated.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I think it may be better long term to start moving away from impermanent loss, like the phrase or the term impermanent loss, into something else. I know like people are calling it divergence loss. We use divergence loss as well, but it's really just like, yeah, it's really just like, all it means is that if you are a liquidity provider for AMMs, you are basically agreeing to um, you know be the counterparty for any kind of trade that anyone wants to do,
Right.
and the price is set in like a specific way. And so if you yeah if the price moves against you and you're still like providing a price, or you're being the counterparty in a trade based on the old price, then you experience loss. And so I think if we want to like take that definition and just compare old pools and concentrated liquidity AMMs, um, you're just like providing more trades with the same amount of capital. And so you experience like proportionally more divergence loss. Um,
Hmm.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think one thing I will acknowledge is like there's still actually a ton that can be done in terms of like education and like tools to help explain everything. Because I do definitely agree that like it is hard to grok all of it. But I at least like kind of, one like glass half full way of thinking about it is I think this is um still like way easier to understand than being a market maker in an order book type exchange. And so,
That
uh,
completely, and especially if you're not in like traditional finance and there's no like contracts and lawyers involved on top of that, yeah,
yeah,
this just takes away a lot of the complexity of like the traditional world. And I think it's like I was definitely guilty of like providing liquidity with not enough information. Of course, not with like a lot of money, but like just when I heard about this concept and I thought it was super cool in Uniswap, and I thought like I should try it. Uh, and I was definitely guilty of like setting myself up for impermanent loss. And
yeah,
when that happened, I'm like, wait, how the fuck didn't my money disappear? And then you're like learning about and the math is not straightforward at all. I think there are interesting models such as like what Thorchain is doing, where you can just like provide liquidity to one side of the pair and the other one is like in their native token. But are you guys exploring any further innovations in of that kind, or do you see in like your future in that regard?
Yeah, definitely. So I think a common request that we've been getting is, um, how can we use whirlpools but um, still have like an experience for like providing liquidity that is similar to the old pools. So kind of the blanket term for something like that is just vaults, right? Like a vault is
Hmm.
something where people can just put in money, they don't have to think about it, and they don't have to maintain, they don't have to like think about kind of positions or divergence loss or anything like that, and they're still able to like earn some type of yield. um, I would say that's like a very important problem, but also a very open-ended problem that doesn't have just like a single right answer. And our strategy right now is we actually have a builders program, so a Whirlpools or an Orca builders program, where we have a few ideas that we've already proposed, and we're like looking for folks in the Solana ecosystem to help build them out. And I think over time, what I expect to happen will be, we'll have like different types of vaults products, and and we'll see them out in the wild, and then we'll like kind of have this like experimentation process where, yeah, we see different ideas, and some will work incredibly well, and yeah, we'll run with it.
You know what? I'm also remembering that I wanted to talk to you about this because I found the fair price indicator. Is it called that? Uh,
Mhm.
is it? Yeah, an incredibly cool concept. Like, um, yeah, because that's another thing. Like, as a newbie, you don't sort of realize that, like, of course, the prices are more or less the same everywhere. Or like, as an inexperienced user, you don't really think about this. But in reality, yeah, the prices tend to be more or less the same, just as like water in your neighborhood might cost the same as water in my neighborhood. But that's far from guaranteed. So I
Yeah,
really think that's cool that you guys incorporated that to help people understand that. Yeah,
yeah.
a big part of why these things are more or less the same is because of arbitrage, and that's just like
Mhm.
a thing that you have to take into account.
Yeah, 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 and like we've already seen with Solana, over the past year, the arbitrage volume has like picked up significantly, and we see a lot more sophisticated arbitrageurs, and it's all a good thing. Or actually, I wouldn't say. Yeah, I would say it's like a good thing because it just allows. It basically makes it easier to guarantee that like if you trade on Orca, you'll get a good price.
And in my mind, that also like, yeah, it helps just uh the I don't know if demystify the whole process is the way the best way to say it, but in general there's a lot of still of magic internet money culture that I think in one way helps because like it makes people more excited about things, but in another it just makes things that are supposed to be rational seem more like, oh, this is just for good fun. I do feel
Yeah.
like in DeFi we're meeting a point in which more and more products are being built for the professionals of finance and that are just like outside the control of regular users,
Mm.
and that's just a shame until the next wave of innovation comes by. uh, but I always like to ask people in DeFi this: what are you excited that's being built right now in DeFi in general?
Oh man, the thing that I'm most excited about, I can't talk about, but
Oh, really?
well, yeah,
Is it illegal?
but I'm very excited about certain things in crypto. Maybe let's see. What am I?
Okay, I'm curious. Let's tell me this and we'll cut it.
I can't. Yeah,
All right.
but
Okay. I tried,
one-
guys.
um, Uh, let's see. What am I excited about? I think um, I mean, I am excited about. I still think that like mass adoption is like, I don't know if it's like, I don't know like how quickly like the mass adoption curve will like pick up, but
Hmm.
it will happen in my lifetime, and I look forward to seeing that. I I think like, yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see kind of like, Solana's kind of like protocol improvements to address like network congestion issues to come online. And I'm excited to see kind of like, yeah, the new wave of kind of, builders that have come in like the last year or year and a half. They're kind of like new ideas to come to market, and we'll kind of see the same thing that we saw before, where like 90% of the ideas were like not 90% of the ideas didn't find product market fit, 10% do, and like the 10% will be really fun to watch, and no one would have been able to predict them. I feel like that was kind of a cop out answer, but that's my answer.
A bit. I'm gonna be honest with you. It was the, the thing that I think is very true is that like you don't know exactly what's gonna hit. Like I think in 2017 even, and there was a lot of fucking madness going around ICO time, you wouldn't have imagined that we have like multi-million markets for pictures of monkeys. That just
Yeah,
wouldn't have
exactly.
crossed your mind at all.
Yeah,
So that's a proof that like the market is not always rational, doesn't always move to the place where you expect it to, or even to the place where you would argue it's more needed to. um, yeah, I think Vitalik has a very cool post about like about exactly this, about how most inventions are a little bit outside of our framework right now. So like the cooler cases for NFTs are not going to be like replacing the things we know right now, or the coolest cases for cryptos are not going to be just like tokenizing your car or whatever. It's going to be something that we haven't even thought about. Um, but speaking about NFTs, you guys also do your own collectibles, and I really like them.
yeah.
I, I really like this. Do they have a special name, or am I just like inventing something of my mouth, like the marine
Orcanauts.
ecosystem, something like that?
They're Orcanauts.
Orcanauts, yeah, that's
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, what's up with this?
Yeah. I mean, it's so we. I mean, first of all, it's kind of like an idea that sprung up with Ori and I, and the rest of the team. We also knew a specific kind of artist friend, um, and I mean, first of all, it does kind of like it is part of Orca's culture, the community culture. I think we also have always we do have kind of like plans, although we can't really, it's not something that we've committed to. But we always kind of like understand the potential of NFTs, and kind of like, you know having kind of an even more retail friendly experience when it comes to interacting with crypto. And so it's kind of part of our strategy there, I suppose. Yeah.
I think yeah, but a lot of projects are exploring funding through NFTs, or just like as a way to conduct a second ICO without actually doing it. Is your use case eventually more going to be oriented to user experience and features for users, or more financial oriented?
Yeah, so it's definitely not for fundraising. So we already did the initial mint, and actually, so I think 75% went to this charity that we had found, and then 25% went to the artist. And so actually, none of it is used, or none of it went to like the team or anything like that.
Hmm.
And um, but I think kind of we've been incorporating actually Orcanauts into our product in some ways, but I think it's really just I guess like we do have some thoughts in like how we can incorporate it further. I think we're still kind of like figuring that out at the moment. Yeah,
Also, yeah, I mean they're super cute. I like them, and
yeah,
I like the design style. It's not like what you typically see in yeah, in NFT land, which I like. Like I feel like all that stuff is moving into too similar of a direction, and in this
hmm,
one, it just looks like like if you went to an aquarium and they gave you a badge or something. Oh well, you have
yeah,
the killer whale in there, yeah. So
yeah,
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 I
yeah.
really thought like this like design worked pretty well with the whole concept. Um, moving a step back because we got on an NFT tracking there. Um, you talked about mass adoption, and
Hmm.
how do you envision mass adoption to start happening? Because in my mind, it's gonna happen at the point where people start feeling it's very normal to just gain yields to fight against inflation or whatever. Uh, I think the day that happens is like we have something like an anchor, but that doesn't rely on a Ponzi scheme, and yeah,
Sure,
that just everyone uses for that kind of thing. But how do you think
sure.
about this?
Yeah, so I would I usually like starting with like things that seem like inevitable given enough time, because I feel like in general that is under indexed by like kind of um, by, for example, the markets, or just like in general like kind of discourse, like public discourse. But I think that crypto will be both like more subversive, or like crypto will be subversive, but it will also be kind of like more regulated than it is now.
Hmm.
As in, I guess I would say like Bitcoin, the original kind of like vision for Bitcoin was like deeply subversive, right? The idea was that like it would essentially like replace the current monetary system and whatnot, and that's like a very radical idea. I think like it will it will like in some ways kind of like challenge the current monetary system, but at the same time, it's to me it's clear that like their crypto will also be more regulated now or in the future than it is now, right? And that there
Mm.
will be eventually certain frameworks to that define like the rules of crypto. And I don't know like exactly. I, I'm not like familiar with it. I don't know what the details will be like, but to me, it's clear that it will be like more regulated in the future than it is now. Um, but at the same time, like if it clearly doesn't fit in well with like the way the world works right now, and so there's going to be like very fundamental shifts in the way the world works, or like even the way the internet works or governments work. And so I guess that's kind of like the baseline when I think about what mass adoption will look like.
See,
Another thing,
I think
yeah.
no. Go ahead, please. Go ahead.
I was gonna like kind of talk about something else. Maybe we can just stay on the topic for now.
Okay. I think you touch a very interesting point because I never thought about this, but it's just getting to my mind that I don't think there were any cases before of non-nation states or non-states period trying to issue their own currency, and that was like the great transgression of Bitcoin, right? Like it's not an authority, quote unquote, issuing money, it's the internet itself, and
Mhm.
that was pretty powerful. And that's the, if you think about it, like of course there were cases of like people like saying, okay, I'm gonna start my own country in like my town and we're gonna use our own money. I think there are cases of that in history, but before never had just like gone out of their way to say, okay, this has value and we'll treat it as money.
Hmm.
That was pretty powerful, and you can see a definite paradigm shift with this whole Terra thing. Whereas they didn't go ahead and say, hey, your UST is not money. They went and said, hey, if you're going to be issuing money, you have to back it. So
Yeah,
that was like a bit of a victory in there, isn't it? That they
yeah,
just said, okay, like we, it's kind of like surrendering the point that people are issuing their own money and just like now, just
yeah,
begging them to stay to try
yeah,
and back it, which is ironic on its own sense. So that's a whole other story.
yeah. Yeah, I think like going off of that, so one like to me one positive thing about crypto is that it makes us kind of question some assumptions that we had always taken for granted, um, about like money or like assets or all that stuff. Like one example is, um, I was actually talking to kind of like someone, like someone who was like someone who had basically spent their entire life in like TradFi, right? And
Mm,
he's probably like 60 years old, and he was asking me like, okay, so like, what is crypto? Like, is it a money? Is it like a currency? Is it like an asset? Is it like a blah blah blah? And it's just like, well, it's like kind of all those things, right? And I think it sounded like historically, um, these different things were like, neatly kind of categorized, like they're neatly bucketed into like different categories, right? Like there was money, which was the US dollar or like the yen or something else, or that's
mhm,
currency. And then there's like equity, which is something else. And there's like commodities or something like that. And they're all different, but like in crypto, they're all kind of like being merged together, and that kind of makes it forces everyone to like kind of question what is the nature of all these different things. The second thing I wanted to say is that, I listened to this like hilarious kind of podcast, I think, where someone was talking about how, the US dollar is actually, it shares a lot of properties with, algorithmic stablecoins, particularly like under collateralized algorithmic stablecoins.
yeah.
But actually, like, but like, why does the US dollar work? Um, and I think like the conclusion was basically that like the US dollar works even though it's like through a particular lens similar to an under collateralized algorithmic stablecoin, because, there's just so much demand for it, right? And so like embedded into like everyone uses it all the time, and like you can't just like, the entire like the world can't just like move away from the US dollar, that easily. And that's like one of the big differences between, for example, Terra and the US dollar.
I'm going into market conditions talk right now, but like, which is not something that I love to do. I don't really like asking people about like their tokenomics or their prices or anything. I just don't find that interesting. But if you think about it, like before this whole Terra thing, people used to love, or this is more like early days of crypto. I'm kind of rambling here, but the people used to talk about like the collapse of the monetary system. Remember, that was like a meme that was everywhere in the crypto community for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and then that meme became inflation, and
Mm-hmm.
then that meme become the next recession is coming, it's here or whatever. Uh, I find it funny how the meme used to be like more catastrophic before,
Mm-hmm.
whereas now it's like, okay, we're afraid of inflation. It's like a very rational fear, but before it was like the world is gonna just burn.
Yeah.
And I think this Terra thing kind of proved that it's not gonna be that hard, like you said. It's not gonna be that easy. Sorry, to take out something like the US dollar out of the equation completely.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it seems that way, right? Yeah, it seems that way for sure. But I guess I don't know. I'm just a developer trying to build. a good DEX on Solana.
Uh, and when I mean, when you think about building a good DEX on Solana, let's get back to the topic of DEXs. Uh, you have a I mean, I guess you're in a funny middle line because you have to be well funded to build such a yeah that kind of thing. You have to know how to use your resources and everything. But in some ways, like what you're building is sort of a public good,
Hmm.
and yeah, it's something that people are supposed to use, and it's supposed to be in the blockchain immutably forever. Um,
Hmm.
do you find bridging traditional finance or bridging money from the quote unquote real world into try and start using DeFi very challenging? Because I reckon like you must be always fighting that kind of fight, right? Like trying to get people like you said from traditional finance that are 60 years old or whatever to try and get to use these instruments.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it is like, everything. Uh, I personally, think that that is inevitable,
Hmm.
but everything has like the right time. And so, I kind of see things like very early on in crypto still. And we're like clearly too early to like kind of bring in all these like assets from TradFi and then like bringing them into the Solana blockchain and trying to get like my dad to use it because like there's so many things like not only is like Solana still like trying to figure out the network congestion issues right like and so I would say like for the next like at least like 2-3 years I would say Orca's very high level kind of focus is um, like building out the most liquid exchange for Solana for like the widest range of assets that are available on Solana, and then two, um, you know, building out kind of like um, ensuring that like the correct interfaces exist for people that want to kind of access these exchanges, whether that
Hmm.
be kind of our interface or some other project's interface. Ensuring that like those interfaces are built.
I Yeah, I mean, I find it very fascinating. Today, I was thinking about that a lot, about the funding model for public goods. This is not just because I talked to to Kevin Owoki the other day from Gitcoin, but also because like we were just talking about over lunch about like how Linux never really got the traction it could have,
What
and
never did?
Linux,
Oh, Linux, yeah.
yeah, the operating system,
Okay.
it just never got like the mainstream traction it could have gotten if it had like a more uh, in my mind it's sort of like a problem of like monetization, right? Of like open source software not being that easy to monetize back in the day, whereas now that's easier because you just insert these financial assets into the
Mm.
equation and the models are more sound. uh, I was just like wondering if you had any more thoughts about like this process of like building a public good as opposed to a more traditional like for profit experience.
Yeah, but I guess like even with Linux, I guess what do you think about the fact that most servers are running on Linux?
Um,
As in
yeah,
like
interesting question. Yeah.
yeah, like even though I guess like the phone that we use is not Linux. Um, like most like I think if you just like randomly if you take like the average like CPU in the world, I think it's more likely to be Linux than anything else.
Is it?
Don't quote me on that, but in that sense, like Linux has a ton of adoption. Yeah. Or
I
like,
think I was thinking more like in terms of like everyday users rather than that kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah, so I think so. One potential model is that one potential model is that um, like shared resources, or kind of like one potential model is that infrastructure will tend to be like a public good, whereas kind of the like the touch points between a human um, and like the public good will be financialized.
Hmm.
That's kind of like the way I feel like you know um, Web 2.0 works, where the closer it is to like the human interaction, the more likely it is to be like you know basically like a public company with like shares, whereas the further down you go the stack, the more likely it is for it to be like open source or
Right.
yeah
There's this meme where they're like stacking little like Jenga blocks, and like you
yeah
see like the infrastructure like all the way down is like one piece of software from like the 60s that's maintained by one person, and
yeah
everything relies on that. Yeah.
yeah. And so I mean I think Orca is similar in the sense that you know our the smart contracts are open source and relatively permissive in terms of like the open source license. Um, but you know, right now the interface, you know, is like basically being developed by Orca, and like the SDK is being developed by Orca. Um, but I imagine like over time, like that will be as like kind of the API endpoints are stabilized and the actual code is stabilized for like the SDK, like that will be, I mean, that's already open source, but like, you know, that will be more and more of a public good.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Um, and just like start wrapping up, you touched on like the big topic when it comes to really the Solana ecosystem, isn't it? Which is like the blackout and the looming possibility of that kind of thing. Um, I think I very much like to use this analogy, sometimes too much to a fault. That like every plane that crashes makes the rest of the planes safer, because yeah, we learn by failure, and often by the failure of others, or of ourselves. So I think that kind of thing happening to Solana makes it less likely that it'll happen in the future, because people have learned from that experience. But yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of like a stigma that Solana has right now. How do you think about this, and how do you, yeah, evaluate everything going in the
Yeah.
future with that kind of thing?
Yeah. So I feel like maybe the way people think about it is like, uh, so right now there are these like network issues on Solana. And so I feel like everyone has their own mental model of like how that's going to be extrapolated to the future, right? Like basically, you know, will Solana just continue to have like these network outages for the next 5 years? Or, you know, maybe even worse, like will it just get worse? Will the problem get worse and worse over the next 5 years? Or like will it resolve itself? Or like will it be not resolve itself, but like will it resolve eventually? And like will it be kind of this like stable um, blockchain that people can build on, right? There's essentially like three possibilities, and everyone has their own opinion on like what the future will look like. And
Hmm.
so uh, I guess like for me, you know, kind of based on what I know, I think it's kind of the third option, which is that like the network will eventually stabilize, and you know it'll be this like this awesome platform for people to build on. You know, obviously other people have other opinions, and I can give my reasoning for why I believe my opinion. But yeah,
Oh, please go ahead. I would love to hear that, because I
okay,
do feel like there's a negative trend right now going on of people like almost want Solana to fail. which to me
Yeah,
it's a shame because man, you should not want a public blockchain to fail. Like those are your friends in the end of the day. That those are the people that hold the
yeah,
same beliefs as you. So yeah,
yeah,
but please go ahead.
yeah. Well, I'll say really quickly, like, if they have this like predisposition to like want the thing to fail, then like, they're kind of their extrapolation of like what is going on, like how accurate, will that be? That's like one thing to ask, obviously. But for me, the reason why is, okay. So I guess like, why are there issues right now? So kind of, the one kind of like my explanation for why there are issues right now is because the cost to send a transaction to the network is incredibly low, right? In fact, like with the kind of spam that the network is receiving, the cost is essentially zero. But the the like the potential benefit of sending out that transaction is like higher than zero. And so there's just this incentive to spam the network with transactions because it's profitable for whoever's spamming it. And so like what
Mm,
Solana is working on right now is essentially like increasing the cost of sending out a transaction to the point where the network can handle it, right? So
okay.
that's kind of like the very simple kind of diagnosis of what's going on. And the solution is I would say, like, so first of all, like this is kind of like a known problem with like that's been worked out in a lot of ways in like internet infrastructure, right? Like DDoSing is a problem, and it's been like tackled, right? Like it took a while, right? Like DDoSing has always been an issue, but like for the most part, you don't really see kind of like the internet infrastructure just like going down because of a DDoSing problem. And so more concretely, what Solana is working on is, so the first thing is, it's essentially like adding an extra step in when like nodes connect to each other to communicate with each other, to make it easier to kind of do like network control, so that it's harder to do these like kind of spam attacks, um, which just didn't really exist before. And it kind of just like didn't really exist because I think like Solana just grew so quickly and they like never got around to it.
That's like the cost of success also, right? Like
Yeah,
you don't
yeah,
find those problems until you get there.
yeah. So specifically, I'm talking about like adding the quick protocol to the way that Solana validators connect to each other or communicate with each other, which is UDP. So it's just adding quick to UDP. The second one is basically requiring kind of when validators or like nodes connect talk to each other, requiring the node that is sending transactions to stake some SOL, and depending on how much SOL is staked, that provides or that puts a cap on the number of transactions that can be sent per second, essentially. And so the idea there is, again, it's increasing the cost of like sending transactions, so that's harder to spam. And then the third one is like a lot more kind of something that's like familiar for anyone that uh, is familiar with Ethereum, which is like a essentially allowing certain transactions to pay more in order to kind of like be included in the block. So like that is also kind of like naturally a way to increase the cost of sending a transaction. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, so I think like to me like they're all fairly reasonable. The other thing is like if you kind of like look at the team, what they are particularly kind of like good at is kind of like understanding the network stack. Um, given their background at Qualcomm, and like these are really like networking problems, uh, and yeah, these are kind of like networking problems, kind of like congestion control issues. Um, and my opinion is that like they're they're kind of uniquely qualified to tackle these problems. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's I'm also not saying that like you know I guess I'll also add that like this is just my observation and kind of like my belief, and who knows what will happen. But yeah, I'm not too worried.
Cool. No, I really appreciate you going in depth in there. I also find it like interesting that a lot of the solutions aren't really like reinventing the wheel.
Yeah,
It's just applying things that have been tested and true in other blockchains, which is, I mean, which is perfectly fine. You don't have to. You don't have to go outside without your pants to prove that you're a free thinker, right? Like you just like so some things just work and are a convention for a good reason. So why wouldn't you apply them if they work? Yeah, man. I'm really happy that we had this chat. I had fun, like especially in the more rambly parts of the of the interview. I think people are really gonna appreciate it. Is there anything that you like to close with, or anything that you like to tell there, like your community or my community listening to this?
sure. I mean, if you've used Orca before and you've enjoyed it, thank you. But if you haven't, would love for you to give it a try. I think the Solana ecosystem is kind of I'm personally excited for like the Solana ecosystem for like the next 12 to 18 months, kind of like seeing the new products that will come out, and seeing kind of like the new innovation. So I personally think now is actually like a better time than ever to like dip your toes. And so yeah, I definitely encourage everyone listening to check out Solana, check out Orca. And yeah, thanks for
And that's the best thing you can do in like a bear market, I think, or if we are really going in that direction. uh, Use this opportunity to educate yourself, to try and test out new things. You're probably not going to be thinking about price increases that much lately, but yeah, there's always fun things to do and learn in crypto, so definitely echo that advice.
yeah, definitely.
And well, thank you very much. I know you were in the process of saying thank you and I cut you off, but yeah, thanks. It's been a really fun chat, man.
Oh yeah, it's been I had a lot of fun talking today.
All right. And yeah, I'm definitely gonna be trying and get my hands on one of these. I was just looking so that I wouldn't butcher the name. One of these hollow whales because they're super cool. All
Yeah.
right. Well, thank you very much, and thanks everyone. Bye bye.
I